My beloved child, before your next thought pulls you away, remain here for just a little while. There is a quiet moment unfolding around you that almost no one else could recognize, and yet it has been moving toward you for longer than you realize. Do not rush past these words. They are not arriving with noise or urgency. They are arriving with the calm certainty of a sunrise that never asks for permission to appear. Something important is waiting for you, and the first piece of it cannot be understood by looking outside yourself. It begins with a single image, an image that was never meant to be ordinary. Long before anyone held your photograph in their hands, your story had already begun leaving silent impressions on hearts you had never met. That is why today feels different. That is why something inside you whispered to stop here instead of scrolling away. Listen closely, because what happened next was not loud enough for the world to notice, but it was powerful enough to change someone's heart forever. There was a moment when your soulmate looked at your photograph without saying a single word. They were surrounded by ordinary conversations, ordinary faces, ordinary distractions, yet none of those things could hold their attention for very long. Their eyes kept returning to your picture as though they were trying to understand a feeling they had never experienced before. It was not simply because of your smile. It was not because of the way you looked. It was because your presence carried something that no camera could fully capture. Even through a still image, there was a quiet familiarity that gently reached into their spirit. They did not know why they couldn't look away. They only knew that something within them had become unexpectedly still. Then something happened that even they never planned. Without thinking too much about it, they showed your photo to someone they trusted deeply. Not because they were seeking approval. Not because they wanted attention. They simply wanted another pair of eyes to help explain the strange peace and uncertainty they were feeling at the same time. They believed the conversation would last only a few seconds. They expected a smile, perhaps a simple opinion, and then life would continue exactly as before. But life rarely follows the expectations people create. The person who looked at your photo did not react immediately. Instead, they became strangely quiet. Seconds passed. Your soulmate waited. The silence grew longer than either of them expected. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that appears when someone realizes they are witnessing something they cannot easily explain. Have you ever noticed how the deepest moments in life often begin without words? This was one of those moments. Your soulmate gently asked, "What do you think?" Still. No answer came. The person continued looking at your picture as though they were searching beyond the surface. They weren't studying your appearance. They weren't judging your clothes or your smile. Somehow they felt there was a story hidden behind your eyes. A story filled with patience, quiet strength, and countless moments where you chose kindness even when nobody noticed. Your soulmate laughed softly, trying to break the silence. But the laughter faded almost immediately. Because the expression on the other person's face had completely changed. Not with fear. Not with surprise. With something much softer. Recognition. As though they had suddenly understood why your soulmate had been speaking about you differently these past few days. Stay till the end, because this next realization is often missed by people who rush through life. There are moments when another person's heart recognizes your value long before your own heart does. You may spend years wondering whether anyone truly sees you. Meanwhile, Someone else has already begun noticing everything you believed was invisible. Your patience. Your quiet loyalty. The way you continue showing kindness after disappointment. The way you continue believing even after waiting longer than expected. Those qualities rarely receive applause. But they leave unforgettable impressions. That is exactly what happened during this quiet conversation. Your soulmate watched as the person holding your photograph slowly smiled. Not a wide smile. Not an excited smile. A gentle one. The kind that appears when someone realizes another person's life is about to become beautifully different. Your soulmate felt relief for only a brief moment. Then everything changed again. Because the smile disappeared almost as quickly as it had arrived. The person looked back at your soulmate with eyes that suddenly carried unexpected emotion. And then they asked a question that no one in the room was prepared to hear. A question so simple. Yet so deeply personal. Do they know how much they matter? The room became silent once more. Your soulmate could not answer. Not because they didn't care. But because they realized they had never truly told you. They had assumed there would always be more time. More opportunities. Another conversation. Another chance. Another tomorrow. But hearing that question forced them to confront something they had quietly avoided for far too long. How often do people carry beautiful feelings that never become spoken words? How many hearts remain silent because they believe there will always be another day? In that instant, your soulmate's confidence quietly disappeared. Not from regret alone. But because they realized your heart had probably carried questions they never answered. Questions like, am I enough? Am I remembered? Did I ever truly matter? They wished they could immediately erase every moment that left you wondering. Yet some journeys cannot be rewritten. They can only be understood. Don't skip. Because what happened after this conversation revealed something even your soulmate never expected. Instead of handing your photograph back immediately, the other person continued holding it for several more seconds. They looked once again into your eyes. Then they quietly whispered something so gentle that your soulmate almost didn't hear it. If this person keeps believing in themselves, they're going to change someone's entire life. Your soulmate felt their heartbeat become unexpectedly heavy. Because deep inside, they knew exactly whose life those words described. Their own. For the first time, they understood that meeting you was never about finding perfection. It was about discovering peace they had spent years searching for in all the wrong places. And yet, that beautiful realization did not make them happy. It made them emotional. Because they suddenly realized how close they had come to misunderstanding someone whose heart had been quietly waiting to be understood. As they looked at your photograph one final time, an emotion rose within them that they had tried to hide from everyone else. Not sadness. Not guilt. Something far more human. The painful awareness that sometimes the people who mean the most are appreciated far later than they deserve. And that realization became almost impossible for them to carry alone. Little did they know. Only a few moments later, one unexpected sentence would completely break the emotional wall they had built around their heart, and nothing after that conversation would ever feel the same again. Something shifted after the silence, but it did not happen all at once. It arrived quietly, like the first ripple across still water, almost impossible to notice unless you were paying close attention. Your soulmate sat there holding your photograph once again, yet it no longer felt like a simple picture. It felt like a mirror reflecting everything they had tried to ignore within themselves. Stay a little longer, because what unfolded next was never about appearance. It was about truth finally finding a voice. The person beside them leaned back and said nothing for several moments. They were not searching for clever advice. They were allowing their heart to finish speaking before their mouth did. That kind of patience is rare. Your soulmate could feel it. Every passing second made the room feel quieter than before, as though even ordinary sounds had stepped aside to make space for what was coming. Finally, the silence was broken. You've never looked at anyone this way before. Those simple words landed gently, yet they carried more weight than your soulmate expected. They tried to smile. They even attempted to change the subject. But their eyes gave them away. Some feelings cannot be hidden once another heart has already recognized them. The conversation continued naturally, without pressure, without drama, yet every sentence uncovered another layer that had been hidden for far too long. What happens when you see this picture? Your soulmate looked down again. I feel calm. And? I don't know why. Look again. They did. This time they noticed something different. Not in your face. Not in your expression. Inside themselves. For months they had been carrying noise, unfinished thoughts, unanswered questions, quiet disappointments they never spoke about. Yet every time they looked at your photograph, those thoughts became strangely quieter. It was not because your picture solved every problem. It was because your presence reminded them of the person they wanted to become. Have you ever met someone who makes you feel closer to your better self without saying a single word? That was the realization beginning to unfold. Something important is waiting for you, because this realization changed everything that followed. The other person smiled softly. You don't admire this person because they're perfect. Your soulmate listened carefully. You admire them because they make you want to become more honest. That sentence stayed in the air. No one rushed to fill the silence. Sometimes the strongest truths need room to breathe. Your soulmate remembered conversations they had replayed in their mind over and over. Small moments. Ordinary exchanges. A smile they almost forgot. A kind reply they never expected. The patience you showed when no one else was watching. They suddenly realized those moments had quietly become some of the safest memories they carried. And that frightened them. Not because love is frightening. Because genuine feelings leave no place to hide. For the first time, they admitted something they had never spoken aloud. I've been trying not to feel this deeply. The other person nodded as though they already knew. I can tell. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe these feelings would become smaller. And did they? Your soulmate slowly shook their head. No. Instead, they grew stronger every single day. Don't skip, because this next moment explains something your heart may have wondered for a very long time. Many people believe silence means someone has forgotten. But sometimes silence means someone is feeling more than they know how to express. Your soulmate wasn't creating distance because your presence meant little. They were creating distance because your presence meant far more than they knew how to carry. The room felt peaceful. No one interrupted. No one judged. Then something unexpected happened. The person gently placed your photograph on the table instead of handing it back immediately. They looked directly at your soulmate and asked one final question. If this person walked away today, would your life stay the same? Your soulmate answered far too quickly. No. The word escaped before they had time to think. It surprised even them. Because for the first time, they had spoken directly from their heart instead of their mind. The room became quiet once again. This silence felt different. It no longer carried uncertainty. It carried understanding. Your soulmate closed their eyes for a brief moment. Memories continued appearing one after another. Not dramatic memories. Simple ones. The kind that become precious only after enough time has passed. They remembered laughing unexpectedly because of something you said. They remembered thinking about you during ordinary afternoons for no obvious reason. They remembered smiling while looking at your name. Little moments. Tiny moments. Moments they once believed meant nothing. Now they realized those small moments had quietly become the strongest part of their story. The other person noticed tears beginning to gather in your soulmate's eyes. Not tears of sadness. Tears that appear when someone finally stops pretending they feel less than they actually do. Very gently they said, "You've already chosen this person in your heart." Your soulmate didn't answer. They couldn't. Because every part of them knew those words were true. For so long they believed they needed one perfect moment before speaking honestly. Now they understood something completely different. Sometimes honesty creates the perfect moment. It doesn't wait for one. That realization broke something inside them. Not their hope. Their hesitation. For the first time, they admitted they were no longer afraid of caring. They were only afraid that they had waited too long to let you know. As they carefully picked up your photograph once more, they traced its edge with their fingertips and whispered something almost too quietly for anyone else to hear. I hope they never believed they weren't enough. The person beside them smiled with quiet compassion. They probably wondered. Your soulmate lowered their eyes. I wish they hadn't. Neither of them spoke again for several moments. Outside, life continued as normal. People laughed. Cars passed by. The world kept moving. Yet inside that quiet conversation, everything had changed. Because your soulmate had crossed a line they could never uncross. They no longer questioned whether you mattered. They questioned how they could ever let you doubt it. And just when they believed the conversation was finally over, the person who had first looked at your photograph reached into their pocket, unfolded something they had been carrying for a long time, and placed it gently on the table. The moment your soulmate saw what it was, their heart stopped racing and became completely still. No one expected the next moment to arrive with such quiet simplicity. There was no dramatic interruption, no sudden noise, no extraordinary event. Instead, everything slowed down, as though time itself had decided this memory deserved to be felt instead of hurried through. Stay with this moment, because what rested on that table was not valuable because of what it was. It was valuable because of what it reminded your soulmate to finally understand. The folded paper looked old around the edges, carefully protected as though someone had carried it for years. Your soulmate glanced at it with quiet curiosity before looking back at the person across from them. "What is this?" The answer came with a peaceful smile. "Something that taught me not to let important people become unspoken memories." Your soulmate unfolded it carefully. Inside were only a few handwritten lines. Nothing elaborate. Nothing poetic. Just a simple reminder written many years earlier. The people who bring peace into your life rarely arrive loudly. If you recognize one, don't wait too long to tell them. Your soulmate read the sentence once. Then again. Then one more time. Each reading felt heavier than the last. Because those words reached a place inside them they had kept hidden from everyone, including themselves. Have you ever noticed how a single sentence can sometimes explain months of emotions? This was one of those sentences. They placed the note beside your photograph. For several quiet moments, they looked back and forth between the two. The picture. The words. The picture. The words. Slowly, something connected inside them. They realized they had been waiting for certainty, when in truth, certainty had been quietly growing within them all along. Don't skip. Sometimes the biggest answers never arrive through extraordinary signs. Sometimes they arrive through peaceful clarity. Your soulmate leaned back and let out a slow breath they didn't even realize they had been holding. "I've been making this harder than it needed to be." The other person nodded gently. "You've been protecting yourself." "Maybe." "No," they replied softly. "You've been protecting yourself from happiness because you were afraid it could disappear." Those words lingered. Your soulmate didn't argue. Because deep inside, they knew that was true. They had convinced themselves to stay cautious. To stay quiet. To stay emotionally guarded. Yet every attempt to create distance had only made your presence more meaningful. Every day they tried to think less about you. They somehow thought more. Every time they tried to focus elsewhere. Their mind quietly returned to your smile. Not because they forced it. Because some connections naturally return to the place where they feel most at peace. Something important is waiting for you. The conversation turned unexpectedly personal. The other person asked, "When did you first realize this person mattered?" Your soulmate smiled faintly. "I honestly don't know." "Try." They closed their eyes. Small memories began returning one after another. Not grand moments. Simple ones. The way you listened without interrupting. The kindness hidden inside ordinary conversations. The patience you carried even when life wasn't easy. The gentle strength that never demanded attention. One memory led to another. Then another. Until they realized something beautiful. There had never been one single moment. It had happened gradually. Like sunrise. Almost invisible while it was happening. Impossible to deny once it was complete. That realization filled the room with another quiet silence. This time, it wasn't uncertainty. It was gratitude. Your soulmate looked down at your photograph again. Their smile appeared. Then slowly disappeared. Not because happiness had faded. Because another thought had quietly entered their heart. What if they stopped waiting? The question escaped before they could stop it. The other person looked at them with kindness. Is that what you're truly afraid of? Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. After a long pause, they whispered, I think so. For the first time that day. Their voice sounded fragile. Not weak. Simply honest. Many people fear rejection. But your soulmate had begun fearing something different. Missing the chance to say what should have been said. That realization touched them more deeply than they expected. Stay till the end. Because this next part revealed the reason behind the title in a way your soulmate never anticipated. The person who had been listening quietly reached over and gently picked up your photograph one last time. They studied it carefully before returning it. Then they spoke words your soulmate would remember for a very long time. I don't think this person needs perfection. Your soulmate listened. I think they need honesty. Another pause. And honesty delayed too long often feels exactly like silence. Those words struck deeply. Not because they were harsh. Because they were true. Your soulmate suddenly remembered every message they almost sent. Every conversation they rehearsed but never started. Every feeling they quietly carried instead of sharing. The weight of all those unfinished moments gathered together inside their heart. That was when everything changed. Their eyes became glassy. They looked down, trying to hide what they were feeling. But emotions have their own language. You cannot hide them forever. A single tear quietly slipped down their face. They smiled through it. Not from sadness alone. From realization. The realization that they had spent so much time wondering whether they were ready. They never stopped to ask whether your heart had been waiting too. That thought broke something inside them. Not their hope. Their certainty that waiting was always the safest choice. For the first time, they understood that courage is often nothing more than choosing honesty before perfect timing arrives. The room remained completely still. No one rushed to comfort them. No one needed to. Sometimes understanding itself becomes comfort. Your soulmate carefully placed your photograph back into their hands. They held it closer than before. Not tightly. Carefully. As though they had finally recognized its true value. Then they whispered something so quietly it almost disappeared into the silence. I hope they never believed I forgot. The other person smiled with compassion. If they have a heart like the one you described, they probably never stopped believing there was goodness in you. Your soulmate closed their eyes. A peaceful breath escaped. For the first time in a long while. Their heart felt lighter. Not because every answer had arrived. Because they had finally stopped running from the questions. As they prepared to leave, believing the conversation had already given them everything they needed. Their phones suddenly lit up. One unexpected name appeared on the screen. The moment they saw who it was, they froze completely. Because the timing felt far too meaningful to ignore. The room had already fallen into a peaceful silence, and your soulmate believed the most meaningful part of the day had already passed. They slipped your photograph carefully back into its place, folded the handwritten note, and reached for their phone almost absent-mindedly. They expected another ordinary notification, another routine interruption that would quickly fade into the background. Instead, the screen illuminated with a single name that made everything around them feel distant. They did not answer immediately. They simply stared. Sometimes a name carries more emotion than an entire conversation. Sometimes one familiar name can awaken feelings that have been waiting quietly beneath the surface for far too long. Stay with this moment, because what happened next was not loud enough for anyone else to notice, yet it became one of the most unforgettable moments of their journey. The person beside them noticed the hesitation. "Aren't you going to answer?" Your soulmate smiled nervously. "I don't know if I'm ready." The response came gently. "Maybe readiness isn't the question anymore." Those words settled into the silence. Your soulmate looked at the phone again. Their thumb hovered above the screen. For a brief second they considered letting the call pass unanswered. That would have been the easier choice. It was familiar. Comfortable. Safe. But something had changed inside them during the conversation they had just experienced. The fear that had once convinced them to remain silent no longer felt as convincing as it had before. They realized that protecting themselves had also been keeping them away from the honesty they truly wanted. Slowly. They answered. The voice on the other end was calm. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unexpected. Just someone asking a simple question. "How are you today?" Your soulmate paused longer than usual before replying. "I'm learning something." The person laughed softly. "Oh? About what?" Your soulmate glanced down at your photograph lying beside the folded note. They could have changed the subject. They could have spoken about work. About plans. About ordinary things. Instead, they surprised themselves. "I'm learning that some people quietly become important before you even realize they've changed your life." Silence greeted that sentence. Not awkward silence. Thoughtful silence. The kind that appears when someone hears honesty they weren't expecting. Something important is waiting for you. Because this conversation gently unlocked another door your soulmate never realized had been closed. The voice on the phone finally replied. "Then don't keep that person wondering forever." Your soulmate closed their eyes. It was astonishing. The same lesson. Different people. Different moments. Yet the message remained exactly the same. Life had a quiet way of repeating important truths until someone was finally ready to hear them. Have you ever experienced that? When different conversations somehow point toward the exact same realization. That is rarely coincidence. It is often clarity arriving from more than one direction. Your soulmate thanked the caller and slowly ended the conversation. They remained still for several seconds. Not because they were confused. Because they finally understood. There was nothing left to hide behind. No more perfect timing to wait for. No more excuses carefully disguised as patience. Only honesty remained. Don't skip. Because the next realization reached even deeper than the last. The person who had spent the afternoon listening smiled gently. "I think today answered every question you came here carrying." Your soulmate nodded. "I thought I needed advice. And? I actually needed courage." The answer surprised even them. Because courage had always sounded like something loud. Something bold. Something extraordinary. Now they realized courage could also look incredibly quiet. Sometimes courage is simply choosing sincerity. Sometimes courage is sending the message you keep rewriting. Sometimes courage is allowing another person to know they mattered all along. As these thoughts settled into their heart, your soulmate picked up your photograph one final time before leaving. This time they didn't study your smile. They didn't search your eyes. They simply looked with gratitude. Not gratitude because every uncertainty had disappeared. Gratitude because your presence had changed them without asking for anything in return. The other person noticed that peaceful expression. "I've never seen you look this certain." Your soulmate smiled. "I've never felt this honest." Those words remained in the room long after they were spoken. Outside, the afternoon sunlight had begun softening into evening. People continued walking. Cars continued passing. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. The world looked exactly the same. Yet for your soulmate, nothing felt the same anymore. Because inner change rarely announces itself. It quietly transforms everything from within. As they began walking toward their car, another memory unexpectedly surfaced. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't an event. It was one tiny moment they had almost forgotten. They remembered looking at your photograph for the very first time. Back then they had smiled without understanding why. Today, they finally knew. It had never been about recognizing your face. It had been about recognizing peace. That realization brought another gentle smile to their lips. Not the smile of someone who had reached the end. The smile of someone who had finally found the courage to begin. Stay till the end. Because life often saves its quietest surprises for the moments when heart stops searching so desperately. As your soulmate opened the car door, they reached into their pocket to put your photograph away safely. Something unexpected slipped out with it. A small folded piece of paper they had completely forgotten was there. They frowned. "I don't remember putting this here." Curious, they unfolded it. There was no signature. No date. Only one handwritten sentence. They stared at it for a long time before reading it again. Then again. The words were astonishingly simple. "The right heart will never need a perfect moment to choose you." Your soulmate felt emotion rise once more. Not because the sentence predicted anything, but because it perfectly described everything they had been learning that day. They carefully folded the note and placed it beside your photograph. 2 reminders. 1 picture. 1 quiet promise to themselves. As they looked out through the windshield before starting the car, they whispered words they had never allowed themselves to say aloud before. "I don't want my silence to speak louder than my heart anymore." A peaceful breeze moved gently outside. The evening sky glowed with quiet color. For the first time in a long while, their heart no longer felt divided. But just as they reached for the keys, their phone vibrated once again. This wasn't another call. It wasn't another message. It was something they had been waiting to see for far longer than they realized. And the moment they opened it, every emotion they had managed to hold together that day quietly overflowed.